and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. After the interruption of Russian gas transit through Ukraine, at the moment the biggest loser seems to be the separatist region of Transnistria. Formerly a part of Moldova, it is de facto an independent state controlled by former KGB officers who have morphed into businessmen and politicians. The sliver of land along the Dnister River, home to some 500,000 people, and having functioned since the collapse of the Soviet Union only thanks to Russian support and shady arms deals, it has teetered on the brink of economic collapse since its establishment. On World Talks, we talk to Kerry Longhurst, professor at Collegium Civitas, about what future Transnistria has and how that future will affect Moldova's chances of joining the European Union. Welcome to TVP World, Professor. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So Transnistria, it's not a word that trips off many people's tongues. So tell us what it is, what the issue is, where it comes from.
Well, you described it really well. It's basically a very thin portion of land sandwiched between Ukraine and Moldova proper. What's interesting about it is that it emerged at the end of the Soviet Union.
So around 89, 90?
Yeah, exactly. So it was a separatist region. After a short civil war, it became, what, as you described it, a de facto state. So it's not recognised in international law. Crucially, it's not recognised by Russia either, despite being strongly supported by Russia. But it is, by being a de facto state, it has public institutions, it has a president, it has public policies, it has a foreign ministry, an economics ministry. So it actually functions as a state, even though it's not actually recognised as such in international law.
So how does it, I mean, normal states, raise funds through taxes, they invest in infrastructure and so on. Is that what happens in Transnistria, or is it different?
It's the same, exactly the same. Because they do have fairly well-functioning institutions and public policies that actually work. But as you described as well, the state has been underpinned by massive financial transfers from Russia over the past few decades, and that has included cheap gas and energy as well. For years and years, the standards of streets and roads and public utilities in Transnistria was actually better than in Moldova proper because of these huge subsidies and because of the inherent Russian support to keep this country going. Okay,
so Russia's been supporting it, reasonably well-functioning piece of land, if I can call it that. But suddenly it's in trouble. Right, because there's no more gas coming through Ukraine for Transnistria. People are, running the risk of rolling blackouts and no heating and so on. Why isn't there some kind of provision that Russia has made to replace the gas that it's no longer receiving through the Ukrainian pipeline?
I think it's all a game. I mean, this situation now has been brewing for years. This reality or this threat to turn off the tap has been with us for well over a decade now. And I think the current iteration, which is affecting Transnistria as you described it, has been brewing since 2022 or thereabouts. The purpose of this from the Russian side, and don't forget also they're blaming Moldova for not paying their energy bills, so that the cut-off has been from kind of two sides, and Russia has decided not to go through the Western Balkans line and through Turkey, so it's like a double whammy of weaponizing energy, basically. And this is to destabilize the region. This is to add to the chaos at the local level, the regional level, and to affect Moldova in particular. I mean, both Transnistria and Moldova are very vulnerable. And this kind of action on the part of the Kremlin is a very effective, immediate and impactful way of bringing about this chaos at the worst time of the year.
Well, yes, and I mean, Russia also tried to influence the Moldovan elections, did they not? Fortunately, that was found out, and a response materialised as a result. Now, Moldova, Transnistria, they're actually very small pieces of land.
Yeah.
Why is Russia so interested?
Well, Transnistria, if you think about where it is, sandwiched between Ukraine and Moldova, it gives Russia a nice little kind of potential launch pad. Now, I don't think Russia is interested in using physical force within Transnistria or from Transnistria. It's all about the chaos and the destruction and the hybrid warfare and the interference in Moldovan politics that can be carried out very effectively by keeping its control.
But to what end do they want to influence Moldovan politics?
I mean, think about Russian foreign policy in general. It's about keeping the kind of former Soviet countries close by. It's about promoting the Russian world. It's just part of that standard playbook, I think. And I think Moldova is particularly useful for them because, of course, people there do identify as European. The vast majority voted for EU membership. But, plenty of people, many people, majority of people still speak Russian and they have an affinity there as well. So it's a nice little kind of case study for Russia to play with and to continuously destabilise and create uncertainties in politics there.
See, now, Russia's often used the excuse of, well, we're protecting Russian speakers and therefore we're going to invade this place or that place. And presumably they could do that with Transnistria. On the other hand, the fact that Russia isn't actually supplying them gas when they need it most, do you think that could turn Transnistrians against Russia?
I was thinking about that, and the thing is, what we don't know about Transnistria is really what everyday people and citizens living there really think, because we don't really have any public opinion polls in that part of the world. We don't know whether indeed these people do have this strong affinity with Russia, or whether they'd rather see their futures in a Western European integrated context. So there's a bit of a kind of unknown, I think, surrounding that. But the reality is, even though this is a de facto state with a very kind of peculiar arrangement, so many increasingly large numbers of Transnistrians have Moldovan passports. And if they can get a Moldovan passport, they can also perhaps get access to a Romanian passport. So therefore they become EU citizens, as well as Russian if they want to take that. So it's a pretty good position. So that border ordinarily between Moldova proper and Transnistria is quite fluid. I mean, not so much now because of the war, but people cross over there and live their lives on both sides of the border, and trade is quite buoyant. So it's kind of a very unusual situation, but quite ordinary and pragmatic too. So I wouldn't be surprised if Transnistrians, especially young people, would rather see their future in an EU context.
Okay, so what are the chances of Moldova actually progressing to talks for EU accession, and what impact will the situation with Transnistria have on those talks?
I think before the war had started in Ukraine, Moldova was edging closer and closer to the EU, but membership wasn't on the table. Obviously, because of the start of the war and the application made alongside Ukraine, Moldova has progressed quite rapidly now. It's in actual accession talks. It's moving very steadily and fulfilling all the membership obligations. And not to say it will happen very soon, the actual accession, but it's on the way. Of course, Transnistria presents a block, but the way in which it's kind of been framed so far is that the assumption is, or was, that the pull of EU integration will be so strong, so compelling and so attractive that stakeholders, citizens, businesses in Transnistria will also think, we want to be a part of that. That's a more profitable future for us. And so in a way, the expectation is that EU membership will wash over the situation and create a dynamic like the two Germanys, and Transnistria will become part again of Moldova. That's the kind of
So it then become
dream.
one country?
Yeah. I mean, I think reintegration has always been the Moldovan government's objective. It's a key strategic goal. But I think everyone's very cautious to not let the Transnistria situation become an absolute block to Moldova joining. No one, in Western European capitals or Chisinau wants that at all.
Okay, but looking at it from the European Union's perspective, aren't they taking a fox into the hen house? If Moldova, let's say, does, including what is now Transnistria, does get into the European Union, and Russia influences still, or still has influence, then Russia already has shown that it has influence in Hungary and Slovakia.
Yeah.
Does the EU really want, a third country which is going to, not toe the line?
Yeah, that's always the danger. And you're right, even Poland, until quite recently, was a difficult member at different points in time in the EU. But that is always the risk. I mean, the thing about Moldova is that it's quite small. It wouldn't be able to cause too much trouble. But the reality is, even though it is moving quite quickly towards meeting membership criteria, it's not going to happen within the next 5 years, let's say. So hopefully a lot of these problems, not just to do with Transnistria, but also rule of law and democracy, which is also very fragile, that these things will have time to sort themselves out before the real prospect of membership comes about. So, and I think as well, that's one part of the question, but also what are the costs and the problems if we ignore this, if we don't keep those doors open and welcome the prospect of enlargement. The dangers of keeping them out are arguably bigger and more troublesome than bringing such members inside.
Right. Now, as you know, Poland is taking over the presidency of the EU Council, has on 1st of January. Is there a role that Poland could play in the enlargement of the European Union in its 6-month tenure? And here, of course, I include Moldova and Transnistria, but also the Western Balkans, for example, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, Poland is in a really good position for this because, I live in Poland, we have a good history of supporting EU external policy projection. Obviously Poland is a fairly new member of the EU since 2004, but also Poland was one of the architects of the Eastern Partnership back in 2009, which really kind of paved the way to the situation we have now. So Poland has credentials, and I think with a good government that it has now, it can be definitely lead the narrative and make sure it continues. But it's a large group of countries who want to join, like you said, the Western Balkans and Moldova and Ukraine. Let's see what happens in Georgia. And so it's a massive task. But I think, can't think of a better country actually to be in charge for this first 6 months, to keep that foot on the pedal and to make sure that the enlargement dynamic doesn't falter and die, because it's a difficult dynamic to maintain. But I'm quite hopeful that Poland can keep that going.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing that Prime Minister Tusk has kind of focused on during the inauguration speech was security for the European Union, and clearly he's referring to the hybrid warfare that Russia is undertaking right now, but also, I mean, the cutting of cables, undersea cables in the Baltic Sea, and so on. How would you assess overall the European Union's attitude towards securing itself against this kind of aggression?
We don't have a very good track record. I mean, since I've been working in these areas for the past, couple of decades, there's been these discussions about having a bigger, more effective security role. Has always been, lots of talk but very little action. But that's the reality of trying to bring together a group of 27 member states and growing, minus the UK. It's another discussion. And it's a tough job. And I think in a way it's a bit of a misplaced priority, because we probably can't do that hard security issue. So we've got to focus on what we can do. And I think this is where keeping up with the enlargement dynamic, expanding, continuing our cooperation with countries like Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia and the Western Balkans, this is the best way to create the kind of resilience to overcome the kind of hybrid warfare that Russia keeps inflicting on everyone. So I wouldn't kind of delve too deeply into that security actor discussion. I think enlargement is the way in which the EU can address and mitigate those types of threats and problems.
There's one piece of the puzzle.
Definitely.
Professor Longhurst, thank you very much for sharing your insights with our audience, and do come and see us again. There's lots more we could be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Good night.